So glad to be here at VehicleSec. I think this is a great venue. What I like to say is I love the venues where it's small enough where you can get to know everybody. Because I feel like even though things like impact factors are always on the minds of things like tenure committees, I feel like the real innovation is going to happen here where it's super new ideas. So again, I'm Kevin Fu from Northeastern University, and I was asked to talk about some of the similarities and differences between medical device security and vehicle security. We'll get right into it. So my background is I actually started in healthcare as healthcare information technology IT, a gopher in a hospital in around I started around 1992 and then finished in 95. Quite a while ago. But then had this problem of I get really interested by fun challenges. So you might know like Takashi, Sarah are in the audience, and they did a lot of work on lasers with my laboratory as well. But today I'm going to talk about a little bit more on the squishy side, more of the humanities side, a little bit less on the solid state physics of lasers and acoustics and radio waves. And so we'll dive through some medical device security research in a mostly chronological fashion, and then draw some comparisons and contrast. So medical device security, at least I got involved in around 2006. So what was that? About almost, not quite 19 years ago. And collaborated with my colleagues Yoshi Kono and Bill Maisel, and wrote this paper exposing some security flaws in pacemakers and defibrillators, as well as proposing solutions. And to give you an idea of how it started, similar to when you heard yesterday with Charlie and Chris talking about some of their work, which was also based on academic work done at USENIX and IEEE Security, there were gaping holes. And so I gave my students an oscilloscope, and I said, hey, see what you can find out. And they sent me this screenshot. They said, well, there appears to be no cryptography whatsoever protecting the RF communication between the defibrillator and the external device that's used to change all the settings. And so you could find all the information, the name of the implanting physician, the diagnosis, the hospital, pretty much the entire electronic health record. Now that's a privacy issue. And similar to cars, you might think, well, what about integrity? So it turns out you can wirelessly induce fatal heart rhythms in these devices. Yes, wirelessly induced. Not in the Wi-Fi sense, although today, who knows, but this was using a proprietary 400 megahertz band, works within a few meters, and the attack was pretty straightforward. Like, this is something you could at least learn about in Security 101, maybe not pull it off, but you could at least learn about it. You basically do a replay attack. So built into every modern defibrillator, and let me just explain, a defibrillator sends a large shock to your heart to basically reboot it. If you get into a chaotic heart rhythm, you can basically reset it back to normal sinus rhythm, usually by sending a very large defibrillation shock. Now, the trouble is there's a debugging command built in, of course, and that debugging command at the time had no authentication. And it allowed you to disable all therapies, disable all electrical therapies, and also there's a debugging command to induce a fatal heart rhythm, which might surprise you. And I was surprised, and I thought, well, why would you have it's like having a command on a Jeep saying crash car. But there's a logical reason for this. The reason is that when you get this surgically implanted, the surgical team wants to know, did they do it right? So as you're taught in engineering, you do an end-to-end test. So how do you test someone whose heart is beating normally in sinus rhythm? You can't. So you have to throw them into ventricular fibrillation, which is a deadly heart rhythm. So built in to every defibrillator is a little command to send a shock to a particularly vulnerable part, the second half of your cardiac waveform, basically, during the depolarization, and it causes it to get this kind of Charlie horse and just starts beating chaotically. So the defibrillator will recognize this with its sensors, send a large shock, and then reboot your heart. I asked the electrophysiologist, hey, what happens if it doesn't work, the test? And he looked at me, it's like, it always works. So that is why, and that was sort of the introduction to security of pacemakers and defibrillators in 2006. Couldn't find any volunteers for this, so we sacrificed a 50-ohm resistor. And about that time, the Food and Drug Administration and government oversight committees started to get involved when they realized, like, wait a minute, that shouldn't be happening. Then around 2016, ransomware began to rear its ugly head. One of the earliest cases affected a hospital system called MedStar in the Washington, D.C. region, bringing down the entire healthcare system because so much depended on the computers. Now, the Russians are genius. They figured out a way to deal with ransomware. What you do is you spritz holy water on your computers. And I thought about this for a moment, and I bet this works. And the reason why it works is you see that guy in the uniform, as he's feeling those droplets on his face, he ain't ever going to stick a USB drive in a computer again. And so I really want to run a controlled trial in a hospital with nurses, and actually the physicians are the worst, and just see if this helps with their muscle memory. So it took a dark turn in 2022 with the war in Ukraine breaking out. There was a schism in a ransomware hacking group, and the Ukrainian-based hackers outed the Russian hackers and published all their chat transcripts. And part of the chat transcript said that this hacking group was going to disable more than 400 US hospitals using ransomware. So this was one of the earliest times where we saw not a theoretical, like, hey, everybody, I'm an academic, you should really worry about security, it's important. Now it's real. Now we actually have nation-state-backed hackers doing this for financial reasons. And so hopefully none of you have seen this. I know a lot of people who have gotten ransomware. It's not that hard to get. And nowadays, of course, probably most people here are experts. You don't even need to click on anything to get ransomware. What are the implications of ransomware in healthcare? Well, there was a lawsuit alleging that a family's baby was killed as a result of distractions caused by ransomware bringing down the computer systems. Basically, the healthcare professionals were believed to be too preoccupied with their computers to notice the fetal heart rate monitor basically gone wrong. So there's not enough time to go through all the interesting cases of medical device security vulnerabilities in a 60-minute talk. So I'm going to see how far I can get, but I'm going to go through some of the bold-faced ones. The other ones are interesting. It's just I don't have time for them all. But the pacemaker was around 2006, and it was kind of quiet after that for about 5 or 6 years. And a few of us were thinking, maybe we are just a bunch of academics. But then a guy named Jay Radcliffe hacked his own infusion pump. He's a diabetic, and he discovered that his infusion pump didn't have encrypted communication or authentication. And so he had a black hat talk in 2011 that basically proved the existence of, you can modify an insulin pump. Then the next year, a different person, Barnaby Jack, probably some of you remember Barnaby, and he was especially good at theater. He was famous for causing ATM machines to spit out cash on stage. He's no longer with us, but in 2011, he remotely hacked an infusion pump and effectively replicating Jay's work, but at a much more visceral level. And so let me explain. Here's a screenshot from a little webinar he gave me. He's holding this infusion pump, and if you look carefully on the UI he made, the drop-down menu says dump insulin. And so he's able to remotely dump all the insulin into your body, which you don't want to do. So if you're an insulin pump user, I think you'll know that this is not good. But just suffice to say, you don't want to just pump drugs into your body without any kind of rate limiting. This device, by the way, has been pulled from the US market, but it took about 10 or 15 years. So that's the time scale we're working on. 2015 starts to get a little more interesting. Still, I'm thinking, everybody's just working on pumps. But this company has since been acquired, but they make a bedside drug infusion pump. If you think like any TV movie or hospital TV show, you always see these beeping things in the background. There's always something with saline solution and a little computer that uses a peristaltic pump to pump boluses of drug into your body at a very precise rate that typically the nurses will set. Well, turns out there were default passwords, insecure network design. FDA eventually recommended discontinuation of this device, but at the time, there weren't a whole lot of things the FDA could do about it. This was pretty early on, but they were warned of these medical devices vulnerable to hacking. 2016 is where things got really interesting, and I haven't yet seen this in the automotive world, but maybe you can educate me if I've just missed the news. There was a small consulting company that short-sold a pacemaker defibrillator manufacturer, published a marketing report saying they could alter and disable devices, and that company lost $1 billion of market cap overnight. And this was a short-selling partnership. It made for great drama. It turns out that the first report, at least in my opinion, the science wasn't really solid. We actually published a report showing that there are alternative explanations other than security that could have explained the same results they saw. A while later, they published a second report that had much better science built into it, showing that they could basically cause security problems inside these devices. I think this is a lesson, though, for this doesn't come up too often anymore in medical device security, sort of white hat hackers or even black hat hackers. But if you are choosing to take the risk to do sort of unauthorized pen testing of a device, just make sure you get your science in a way that follows the scientific method. You know, you've eliminated null hypotheses as a lesson that I think many people have learned from this. Okay, after that, we get into more like really head slap, like you just have a whole bunch of hard-coded passwords. So GE hard-coded all sorts of passwords in their various medical devices. And they do a lot of big iron, things like radiology. They had so many default passwords. One of my colleagues created a word cloud and printed coffee mugs with all of their passwords on it. It was that bad. And so, you know, we bring old passwords to life could be their motto, I guess. I have opinions on this, but I will not share it here on the camera. Elekta. Elekta is an interesting company. They make radiation therapy devices. And they were affected by ransomware. And in fact, this happened while I was at the Food and Drug Administration as the acting director of medical device security. And it was the first case I am aware of where there was harm done because of a security incident. Most of the previous cases were what I would say are vulnerabilities where something could have gone wrong, but thank goodness they didn't. In this case, things went wrong. When ransomware broke into the manufacturer's private cloud, instead of following what I would call an OT, operational technology cybersecurity playbook, they followed the IT cybersecurity playbook. And this may have parallels with vehicles. Their playbook was ransomware breaks in, we shut it down. So like think of that scene from the first Ghostbusters where the guy's like, shut that machine down. So they shut down their cloud, their private cloud. Well, what was then discovered was, oh shoot, all the dosimetry, basically all the radiation planning for all the patients is stored in the cloud. And so the radiation therapy machines don't function if they don't have access to the cloud. So there was a kind of a single point of failure there where they weren't able to work locally. And so globally, all of this product line was down. Radiation therapy could not be delivered. And for those of you who are cancer survivors, you'll know radiation therapy is not something where you just go like, hey, can you come back tomorrow? It's extremely regimented, extremely scheduled. You don't want to have too much radiation in a short period of time. You don't want too little. These devices are highly, highly utilized. You probably won't find too many minutes of downtime on these devices. This downtime was weeks. I believe the advertised uptime expected was something on the order of like 6 minutes down a year, but this was down for weeks. I think, and we have to be careful not to blame the company. I think in this case, they were one of the earliest companies to be hit by ransomware, and they responded quickly, but still it did delay the cancer therapy. More recently, and actually this was just news last week, It took about 3 years. Illumina is a genetic sequencing company. I was just there last week. They have really cool wallpaper with all your favorite DNA. But they had some insufficient security controls on their DNA sequencing devices that are sold to other medical providers. What's interesting is when a company gets hit, they tend to finally create a cybersecurity program. And when I say a program, I mean standing up a group, a dedicated group of people, security engineers, pen testers, attack and defense. So they have a much improved cybersecurity engineering process so that they can hopefully eliminate these problems in the future. But it did cost them $10 million. Change Healthcare happened last year, and they are everywhere. You may not hear the name, but anytime you go to see a doctor, or if your parents or someone is on, say, Medicare, likely the billing is being processed by this company. They got hit by ransomware, and it brought down all the billing systems. And it was so bad, Congress passed a special law temporarily getting rid of certain regulatory requirements for pre-approval of medical procedures, because basically the systems didn't function as expected, and there were huge delays. The CEO ended up paying $22 million for a ransom to try to get their systems back, and guess what? They didn't get their data back. Yeah, don't pay ransom to hacker. So the hackers basically skipped town, and their value chain suppliers in the ransomware were left holding the bag. It cost the company $2.4 billion, according to their earnings report last year. CEO was not fired. Okay, so those are just a few examples, everything from the super technical of using RF to inject communication, all the way down to, wait, you've got a default password. And these are the kinds of issues FDA has to grapple with every day. I was on a phone call with a bunch of manufacturers a few years ago when the new cybersecurity rules were coming out for medical devices, and one of the manufacturers goes, hey, question, regulators. We set a password on our website for downloading our firmware. Is that good enough for security? And I'm like, oh my God, this is how bad it is. So if you go into that world, you just need to sort of take a Xanax or something. I don't know. You just need to go like, okay, it's going to be really basic, and try to use just 2-syllable words because they mean well, but there are very few security experts in that space. Some of the companies have stood up really, really good cybersecurity programs, but it's not universal by any measure. And some of the smaller companies, you may go in, and actually, I went to one small company who builds implantable medical devices, and I said, hey, can I talk with your software engineer? And they said, oh, we don't have any. We laid off all the hardware and software engineers to plow all the money into a clinical trial. And I go, oh no. So some of the manufacturers don't have the resources to think about security. So how does FDA work on this? So FDA is basically the most significant regulatory authority in the US, and they do also affect indirectly international. They regulate about 250,000 medical devices. So I don't know how many different models of automobiles exist, but I'm guessing it's less than 250,000 different models. But this includes about 25,000 manufacturers, and they get about 20,000 submissions per year. What is a submission? It's just like a paper submission. They have this web portal. You upload all your design documentation, and you say, FDA, please give us clearance to sell this in the United States. Effectively. And so they get 20,000 of them. I don't think USENIX security gets 20,000 a year yet, right? No. So these guys have to imagine their program committee, right? So there's a lot of pseudo program committee members. They're called FDA reviewers. So in 2009, I skewered the FDA, and I basically said, this is a boneheaded policy you have. So I went to their website, and I said, hey, how do you make sure that security gets built into your medical devices? And they go, oh, well, it's a shared responsibility. You should all just get along with your vendors. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. So I made all sorts of cartoons mocking them, and I'll save you my artwork. But they improved a lot. So I think they just needed a gentle push to get them going. And now I would say there are hundreds, if not even more, security experts guiding a lot of the thinking on this, both within FDA as well as at companies who give some very thoughtful opinions. So in 2014 was the first time there was any regulatory expectation of building cybersecurity engineering into a medical device. Before then, the policy was get along with your vendor, which of course wouldn't help. So 2014 kind of spelled out, who remembers let's see, it was the, Jerry Saltzer has some really interesting writings on sort of basic security engineering principles that you might go by, things like economy of mechanism, keeping your secrets manageable, so it's open design principle, that sort of stuff. So inside that guidance document contains some really, really basic security engineering advice that you might see in an undergraduate course. I think it was on the order of 10 pages, really short. 2016, they decided, okay, we've at least got our first shot on what you build into a device. Maybe we should publish a document on what should you do when something goes wrong. This is called post-market cybersecurity. When a product is out in the field and a vulnerability or an incident happens, what do you do? And so I call this the humanities side of security, which is perhaps equally important, I think. And it talks about how you stand up within a company, the communication procedures, who do you call when something goes wrong, having a plan, how do you communicate to patients, how do you communicate to physicians. And it was really important. And at the time, there weren't many incidents or vulnerabilities, but now it's got a regular cadence, and so this post-market guidance has become much more important. Now, more recently, FDA revised its, what I consider its cybersecurity engineering, what do you need to build in, design in 2022. They updated it just another month ago. It's now blossomed to way over 50 pages, and it gets into some nitty-gritty details. The old one was show us your designs. The new one says things like, well, I'll get into the new stuff in just a moment, in just a couple slides. So while this is all going on in the United States, the regulatory agencies all across the world are getting together in what's known as the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. They have all these boring acronyms, so IMDRF, and they've effectively standardized a framework for both the pre-market and the post-market. So what security engineering do you build in, and what do you do when something goes wrong? How do you communicate it? So this framework is now spread across the whole world, and you'll find it everywhere. China, Germany, Japan, all the countries are using this framework to build their own regulations, and they very much resemble what FDA did. And actually, this brings more certainty to manufacturing. The manufacturers like it when they have fewer different regulations. They know they're going to have regulations, but they don't want to have 300 different ones. And so the more you can harmonize those regulations, the easier it is to manufacture fewer different versions of a product. So in the United States, I helped co-lead this working group called the AMI TIR 57. It's just like USENIX, we have a lot of acronyms. It's the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation. ISO has delegated to this group of about 6,000 corporate members to standardize anything having to do with medical devices. And so we stood up the first medical device consensus standard. They rejected the logo I made for them. I thought it was cute. Designed in, not bolted on. Spread it on all your French fry medical devices. But that was sort of the beginning. And again, that was, it's probably similar to what's going on with SAE and some of the vehicle cybersecurity standards. And then FDA points to these standards, telling manufacturers, if you do this, you will have an easier time getting through the cybersecurity review. So I promised a little bit more deep dive on just one regulatory document, and this is the dry part. I'll just try to make it as exciting as possible. FDA is known for being really stoic and just very, because they have to be an arbiter, and so they try not to put too much exciting stuff into their slides. Congress passed a law, and one of the key differences with vehicle security, as far as I'm aware, the medical device market is the only market in the United States that has a law requiring cybersecurity engineering. Most other markets have what we would call regulations or policies or recommendations. Here, both the House and Senate passed a bill requiring this. And so it's got a horrible name, Section 524B, and that's because 524B refers to a particular part of US law that was passed. And so Congress defined something called a, quote, cyber device. I hate the name, but that's what they chose. So they said, hey, if you're a medical device manufacturer and you're a cyber device, then you're going to be subject to this law. And so they basically defined it as, hey, if it has the ability to connect to the internet. And the second bullet was the most interesting one to me, because the manufacturers are like, oh, well, we didn't mean that to be on the internet, so it doesn't apply to us. And so a bunch of hackers are like, let's put this on the internet. Let's show how we can modify it. FDA has since revised this documentation to go through a litany of examples where they say, hey, it's not whether you intended the device to be on the internet, it's whether it has the capability of somebody else putting it on the internet. That's what matters, because that's where the threats and the risks start to expose. And they had this long document explaining what's a cyber device and what's not. And I'm like, hold on, guys. I have a much simpler figure. I gave them this figure. Is it made out of solid wood? No, you're probably okay. Yes, you're likely a cyber device. So somebody else made this for me when he saw me talking about, I like woodworking, so I thought this would be a good analogy. But it's basically true. If you're a tongue depressor made of solid wood, you don't need to read Section 524B. Congress doesn't care about you. But if you have anything else magic in there, 99% chance you're a regulated device. Anyhow, I'm not going to go through this in a huge amount of detail other than this slide, where some of you are probably aware of the software bill of materials, which I'm always amazed why it has taken so many decades for someone to even put a name to this. Because when I used to do file system development, I'm like, RPM install, Debian, Linux, whatever. I was like, well, of course you know every version of everything you're installing. No, they don't. So now FDA is required to ask for a list of all the third-party software inside your medical device, whether it's closed source or open source, and they want a matrix linking every single of these thousands of software packages to the National Vulnerability Database, saying which ones have known vulnerabilities and how are you mitigating those if it has a known vulnerability. And trust me, every medical device has known vulnerabilities, but it may be controlled. There may be some other compensating control to keep those threats, keep those vulnerabilities in check. But now they have a system in place, so at least they can be aware of these. Now, this doesn't solve the unknown vulnerability problem, but the known vulnerability problem is already hard enough. Think back to my comment about default passwords. There are a lot of boneheaded security problems. Okay, so I think I'll have time to talk about how a bill becomes a law. Has anyone seen the Schoolhouse Rock video about how a bill becomes, this is going to be like everybody over like 50. Okay. Congress does this, Senate and House do this, they get together, they shake hands. That's not how it works. But what happened in this particular case is, actually it started in the House. A couple representatives had decided that, and actually these were at the time, the Republican minority from Texas. They proposed something called the Patch Act. And the idea was they wanted to require that medical devices could be patched quickly if there's a security vulnerability. And they went through the traditional congressional process of they hold hearings. They bring in experts to give their opinions. And I just found it really interesting that the Republican minority said we need regulations because the industry is not self-regulating sufficiently. They convinced some senators to agree. They put in another bill to try to go through what's called conference, where they can reconcile the House and Senate versions. It did not pass. So it kind of got it's not a pocket veto, but it just never came up for discussion. So it sort of silently got discarded because when a session of Congress after 2 years is over, all the bills that were in progress just disappear. They become nullified, basically. No more debate. And so it sort of silently went away. But a few months later, Congress passed something known as the Omnibus Bill. Excuse me, I can't say that word. Omnibus Bill is one, this one was, I think, something like 5,000 pages long. It's basically all the stuff that we couldn't get passed, and so we're going to throw it all in there, all or nothing. Hey, are you in or are you not? And I'm sitting there at FDA after the Patch Act basically, it's not vetoed by the president, but it was just effectively didn't pass. And we're like, oh well. And then basically get a phone call saying, hey, did you hear, it seems like the Patch Act got put into the Omnibus Bill and Congress passed it. I'm like, what? And so it just kind of happened because of the dedication of a single junior staffer, as far as I can tell, who was very dedicated to healthcare. And she wrote it. And I could tell by the words in the bill, I'm like, I know exactly who wrote this. And I know who she works for. And I'm glad she did it. She's since moved on from Congress. But she served one of the Republican congressmen in Texas. So inside there, you're going to find this bill. Anyhow, I don't have the copy up here at the moment. At the same time, all the lobbyists start to get involved. So the American Hospital Association sort of weighing in on why they think it's something important to do. We had also weighed in earlier through federal advisory boards, which have become less common, where we basically asked NIST to step in, as well as several other non-regulatory agencies in the US government to really think about who needs to own this problem of medical device security. I'm not sure if that's true with NTSB, if there are issues of, hey, who owns the risk? But it was clear in 2012, no one entity would, who's heard of a RACI matrix? Okay, a couple managers in the audience. But nobody was responsible or accountable. It was not clear who had to catch the ball when something went wrong. And thank goodness this got started in 2012 before some of the big problems started around 2016. But 19 years later, there are, oh, by the way, our original pacemaker paper got rejected from Oakland in 2016. But actually, I thought it was a legitimate reject. It was very half-brained. It was more theoretical, like, imagine a pacemaker. So I'm like, yeah, I would have rejected it too. But then the next year, we had actual experimental results. So maybe that's a lesson for students. You should try to submit, I would say, as early as reasonable, where you can get meaningful reviews. Program committee members may disagree with me, but I think it's important to get feedback as long as it's meaningful feedback. We wrote that NIST letter in 2012. FDA didn't pass, but created its first regulatory document around 2014. That's about the same time that the federal government started, they love these terms, stand up, thread the needle. So they stood up this organization that was this public-private partnership, another government term. So basically, some organization outside the government was blessed. You are blessed to organize people for healthcare security, and they've done a really good job at it. So they pretty much have every medical device manufacturer, pretty much every hospital in the United States involved. And they even have some special authorities through some laws where they can get involved with certain confidential information, and it's not subject to FOIA. Certain aspects are not subject to FOIA in order to encourage manufacturers to be more candid about some of the problems. And so for certain legitimate uses of incident management, they're able to share this confidential, non-classified information more easily. But suffice to say, in 2006, so 19 years ago, 100% theoretical. And so many people hung up on me when I said we need to think about this. But now we've got ransomware groups, nation-state-backed groups, and it's a real problem with billions of dollars lost already. So I wanted to draw an analogy here. There's a famous doctor. Does anyone recall the story of Ignaz Semmelweis? Anyone hear this name? Oh, a few people. Okay. Yeah. So, oh, yeah, of course, sir. Because I would drive this home in the laboratory. You must read these books from the 1800s. More USENIX security papers need to cite cybersecurity papers from the 1800s. I don't understand why we aren't citing more cybersecurity papers from the 1800s. But anyhow, in around 1840, I think it was 1843, maybe it was 1842, just to set some context, physician Ignaz Semmelweis was working with what's known as childbed fever. This is where mothers giving birth just suddenly died for some reason of infection. And Ignaz goes, he basically said, physicians should wash their hands after, say, working with childbirth before moving on to the next childbirth. And the reaction from the esteemed physician community was, doctors are gentlemen, and therefore their hands are always clean. That was the literal quote from one of the physicians who was arguing against Ignaz. Now, to give you an idea, though, of why this might happen and why this relates to medical device security as well as vehicle security is the very first security paper in any field where it involves finding a vulnerability, the manufacturer is probably going to say you're blowing smoke, you don't know what you're talking about. At least that happened in our world of medical devices. But there's a reason for that disbelief. What's the reason? Well, the analogy here is in the 1800s, when he published this note, it wasn't even a real paper, it was more of a note. The plumbing was just invented, okay? So 2 years prior, I believe it was the patent filing for the P-trap. That's that little U-shaped piece of plumbing you find under your sinks or your toilets so sewer gas doesn't come up in your house. So when you're telling people to wash your hands, that's actually a pretty big ask. That means you got to bring in this bucket of liquid that you just pulled from the well, oh, you got to clean it somehow. You maybe got to boil it. Maybe you're going to put in some really nasty stuff into the water we didn't understand antiseptic technique back then, but you would put stuff in it, and it was kind of caustic on the hands. You put your hands in it, and it starts to feel all nasty. The skin's falling off. So imagine a physician being asked, like, hey, between every patient encounter, could you just do that? Like, put your hands in this, go out to the well, similar today, like if you're telling a manufacturer, can you just fix this security? They're like, that's a pretty big ask. What, you want us to redesign the entire product line? And for some theoretical incident from some kid who just found this problem in our device. So if these two physicians were alive today, they'd probably be saying medical devices should be secure, doctors are gentlemen, and therefore their computers are always secure. And I'm imagining, I don't know if Charlie and Chris or Yoshi and others had sort of a similar reaction, but I suspect the vehicle community probably had a similar reaction 10 years ago. Okay, so I want to leave a lot of time for questions, but I'm just going to recap a little bit about what I think is similar between automobile security and medical device security and what might be different. And correct me if I'm wrong, since I'm not the vehicle security expert. Just raise your hand if you're saying, no, that's not true. So I believe here on the left-hand side, both of these fields have the following in common. First of all, you have the manufacturer stages of grief. Right? First, denial. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. And then, finally acceptance. Dang it. We need to hire some security engineers. Maybe we should go hire Chris and Charlie. So the same thing happened in medical devices. Actually, a bunch of my former students have been hired or now lead companies in medical device security. So it's no longer adversarial in that sense. It's much more the manufacturers and the medical community realize they actually need a security team for both security engineering to build it in, as well as team members who are good at communicating to the public to handle when the inevitable vulnerability comes up. This could be a vulnerability in your own proprietary medical device software, or it might be something as simple as log4j is inside our product. I think another similarity is sort of the safety versus security question. There are many cases in engineering where you may choose something to optimize safety that might harm security or vice versa. I think you'll find that similar in any kind of risk management-based system. And so I used to teach sort of classic computer security, and in that class, I would call it a controls class in the sense that we would teach students about all the ways to control risk, control security issues, like got to use this crypto, that sort of stuff. We never taught them, when don't you use crypto? Because the students would go like, why would you ever not use cryptography? That makes no sense. But it turns out in medical devices, there are plenty of cases where you don't want security. So for example, if your defibrillator is malfunctioning, let's say you're using some kind of authentication, a password, heaven forbid, two-factor, and then the device starts malfunctioning. What are you going to do? Like call up tech support? No. You need it right now. And so built into every defibrillator is a magnetic sensor where if you hold up a little magnet to the device, it'll automatically go into what I call like a safe mode, a pre-programmed state, a basal heart rate, maybe at 60 beats per minute, and it'll disable the defibrillator. It malfunctions. So I have a former student who was an EMT, and he had a defibrillator patient in his ambulance, and his defibrillator was malfunctioning. It just kept shocking the guy. And so eventually he just told him, sit in that fiberglass chair. I can't touch you because you keep getting shocked. And so if you put a magnet up to the device, it will disable it. I'd love to hear if vehicles have something similar. Like if a vehicle is out of control going 100 miles an hour down the highway, can you hold up a magnet to the steering? I don't know. But maybe that's a good idea. Another big similarity, of course, is the whole notion of real-time embedded systems. So medical devices are totally real-time. You don't want to, actually, there are plenty of incidents where the real-time system F's up. Fetal heart rate monitors. Fetal heart rate monitor got infected by a piece of conventional malware about a decade ago. What do you know? It misses a few interrupts. What do you think happens? Okay, so how many people here do interrupt programming anymore? One guy in the front. Oh, in the back. Oh, a couple people. So plenty of, so for those of you who haven't done interrupt programming, that's where you basically write a giant while loop, and you're going, you're listening for some kind of incident to happen. It might be a timer, it might be a sensor trip something, and when it trips, it suddenly changes the program counter to start executing some what's called interrupt handler code. Some anomaly comes up. So anyhow, the way it would normally work is you have on this particular device, you'd have a timer. It would sample the fetal heart rate. I don't know the exact, but let's say once a second. So once a second, it would go. Because you have an interrupt handler that says, boom, 1 second is up. Now, when malware broke in, it changed all the timings. And so it wasn't sampling at the right rate, but it was still dividing by 1 second. So it was giving erroneous heart rate measurements to the clinical team. Fortunately, if you want to find someone skeptical, go to a clinic. They don't trust their instruments. At least the good ones don't. So when they look at the screen and you see like, what, 300 beats per minute? No. Something's, the instrument's malfunctioning. So in that case, they realized it's not working correctly. But you can imagine more complicated scenarios where you might trust that data coming from a device who's missing an embedded system interrupt and causing it to give bogus information. Okay, back to similarities. Global impact, large user base. Pretty much everybody gets healthcare. Pretty much everybody gets in a vehicle. Maybe not everybody drives, but I think it'd be hard to find someone who's never been in an automobile. Probably pretty hard. Also makes great TV shows. So in The whole pacemaker thing comes up all the time. It's like a recurring, like every 4 years, there's another TV show that has like a plot line of somebody's defibrillator being attacked. Some of them are pretty good. Some others are like a little hokey. Actually, there was a TV show called Homeland, where there was an episode where the vice president had I think a defibrillator, and then somebody attacked it. And part of the plot line was they were trying to guess the pin for the defibrillator to basically break in. And so I was shaking my head going, there is no pin. Like, there was literally no authentication. You just had to send the right RF packets and it would work. So it's probably improved now. A lot of the devices use Bluetooth, so it's got to be better. No, but seriously, a lot more thought goes into the security engineering now. They also do use a lot more third-party products, less proprietary, much less roll your own crypto. Yes. But still, even if you use existing crypto libraries, you can still get it wrong. And I think most of the manufacturers, the big ones, tend to realize that, and they have sort of secondary things in place. Now, some areas where, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of any nation-state-backed organized crime doing ransomware on vehicles. But it is happening on a daily basis in hospitals. It's very profitable. There's actually been harm. So there's a lawsuit on this infant death. FDA has come down publicly saying their definition of harm means not delivering timely care. It includes not delivering timely health care. So when a radiation therapy machine, an entire product line is knocked offline for 6 weeks, they consider that harm. So one of the few places where I'm aware of actual harm being declared. And then finally, I'm not aware, even forget vehicles, just any other, whether it's nuclear power plants or consumer products, I'm not aware of any other market in the United States that has a law requiring cybersecurity engineering. So this is by statute, not just policy. So you could write policy documents as a small group in any government agency and say, this is what we care about. But now FDA is required to do this by Congress. So it's not just a soft policy. It's not just a pseudo, like regulations are not really laws. They're not as hard fast. A law is unequivocal. Okay, so wrapping up and leaving some time for questions. If you're interested in this, we hold an annual event, usually around President's Day weekend. Actually, our next one is coming up in 2 weeks in Korea. So the Korean government has asked us to hold an event on things like software bill of materials for medical devices. But if you can't make that, our next one is February 18 to 20 in Las Vegas. You'll get to meet lots of medical device manufacturers, FDA regulators usually join us, and we have a lot of hospitals that come to learn what we call medical device security 101, like basic risk management. Let's say you're a software engineer and you've just joined a medical device company. What do you need to know to at least get a solid footing for medical device security engineering? So that's coming up in February. Also, I'm hiring. I'm not hiring all types of disciplines, but I am hiring in medical device security. We're hiring about 50 people, primarily in research and software development. The job posting's not live yet, but if you follow, just look up my name on LinkedIn. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I'll be posting it there. So I'm not accepting resumes personally, sorry, but you're welcome to ask me in the hallway. I'm imagining nobody here wants to be like a financial manager, so I'm not listing all the jobs. But the 3 jobs that I thought might be of interest to this community, one is hiring a postdoc who has experience in either hardware or embedded security or some kind of related field. That postdoc is going to be doing some work on what I didn't talk about, which is more the analog security, like injecting things into computer chips using lasers, RF, and acoustics, that sort of variety. Traditional academic publishing, as well as penetration testing medical devices for and with the consent of the manufacturer. So they now actually give us their source code. It's really great. They're like, do some glass box. So if you're interested in that, have your PhD advisor reach out to me. And then if you're a little more senior, I'm also hiring a research scientist. This is much more closer to being a faculty member, or some people will be a research scientist for a short period, a couple years before becoming a faculty member. There you'd have much more supervisory role in healthcare security, as well as pen testing and writing research proposals. And then finally, if you're less of a researcher, but more of a I like to write code, I am hiring full stack engineers, system integrators, UX engineers, but it's going to be on some pretty complicated large software projects. So 3 different kinds of positions. If you're interested, you're welcome to catch me in the hallway, and I can tell you more. So wrapping up, moving forward, at least with medical devices, I'm a big proponent. You build the security in, don't bolt it on. And in fact, that little infant chair was recalled. So literally don't bolt it on. And cybersecurity is really a very foreseeable risk. It's obvious. It's totally obvious that these problems could happen. It's not an if, but a when. And so the unavailability of patient care has happened repeatedly because of cybersecurity risks. What hasn't yet happened, and by the way, this slide, I think Sarah, I don't know, Sarah's probably seen this before, but I've had this same slide for about 19 years. You can tell from the fonts. And probably the colors. But when I first started, people were like, nobody's going to be able to knock hospitals off the internet. Well, that happened. Nobody's yet affected the integrity of medical sensors or chart data, but that could happen easily tomorrow if somebody just chooses to. There's nothing stopping you. It could be through insider threat, somebody flipping a bit. Let's say in your DNA testing or maybe your blood tests, you flip 1 bit from positive to negative. I'm not aware of anybody looking at that. So it may happen tomorrow, might not happen for 20 years, but I think we need to protect integrity of data. The biggest gap right now, which probably has some similarity with vehicles, is prioritizing clinically relevant security risks. So what do I mean by that is not all security risks are high priority for a medical device. And it's actually kind of counterintuitive. So if you go into the National Vulnerability Database, or if you look at CVSS scoring, who's familiar with CVSS, that acronym? In this crowd, I'm imagining most people. Okay. So Common Vulnerability Scoring System. It basically tries to estimate the severity of a security vulnerability. If you have a 10 CVSS score, normally you think bad. In the medical device world, you may have a CVS score of 1 that could be existential threat to the entire healthcare system. So it might be a low score, but it may have a really, really high clinical impact. Similarly, you might have a 10 that's really, really bad, but there's some other control in place to keep it in check. And so it's really not going to affect a patient today. Still want to fix it, but at least we have some other, hey, at least you're wearing a seatbelt. So there may be some issues like that with vehicles where things that appear to be really low risk could be of profound impact just because of the sheer quantity of automobiles, or maybe the fact that you're doing it at 100 miles an hour. So you have to prioritize based on clinical relevance, which is hard for security people to grok, which is why I like to bring my students into the hospitals. They go into surgery, they meet physicians, they understand how things fail in the very human world. For security engineers, the biggest thing you have to make sure you do is actually not do. Don't interrupt clinical workflow. So if you're making a medical device or if you're helping a hospital, if you say, oh, we're just going to set a password on that, no, do not pass go, fail. And the reason for that is you're probably causing more harm than good. Because if you're interrupting the workflow, it's going to confuse the clinicians. The nurses are going to get confused. They're going to start making dosing errors on drugs. You do not want to change how they interact with the patient. So whatever you do needs to be invisible, basically, in the ideal case. And most security engineers, at least the ones that I've trained, focus on technology. Most safety specialists focus on risk management. And in risk management, you're allowed to have risks. You can say, I accept that risk. That's a residual risk. We will pass on that risk to the end user. But in a crypto course, we never do that. right? We don't let the user choose how many bits of entropy. No. But in the safety world, you may actually do that because the end user might have some contextual information of clinical relevance that would overrule security. But in reality, you need a balance of both. So I think I'll just end there. If you want to know more, oh gosh, it's way at the bottom, but spqrlab1.github.io, you can find a lot of our papers in this space, as well as our fun laser papers. But if you can search backwards in time for anything related to medical devices. And happy to take any questions in the last 5 minutes or so. And I hope that everyone here goes off and fixes vehicle security. And if you get bored of that, we've got plenty of problems with medical devices. So I'll hand it back to Sarah.